So yeah, thanks again everyone for attending. We do respect your busy schedules, so like the other webinars in our series, we've kept the duration relatively short to make it easier to fit into your day. We hope you'll find the content interesting. Hopefully it'll provide some useful ideas regarding how you can improve your ability to successfully implement new supply chain management initiatives within your company. Even if you can just pick up one key point or one concept you can take back and apply to your business, it'll make your time spent with us today worthwhile. Hopefully you'll pick up more than one, but let's get started here. We'll jump right in. In today's competitive business environment, a company's supply chain is obviously crucial for its success, especially mid-market companies who are caught between both small and more nimble competitors and larger, better resource competitors. So mid-market companies are looking for ways to improve their supply chains, especially by upgrading their existing supply chain tools or maybe implementing new supply chain systems to stay competitive. And research supports the fact that this is a pretty smart move. For example, a recent study by Deloitte concluded that companies that position their supply chain as a strategic asset deliver 70% better results than their peers do. These companies tend to go beyond a traditional cost focus, and they look holistically across their supply chain to create value for the company, and they use their supply chain more like a competitive weapon. More than half of these companies also have only one supply chain leader who owns and manages all of the areas typically under the supply chain umbrella. Things like product development, demand planning, supply planning, sourcing and procurement, manufacturing, logistics, and distribution, all under the one umbrella. The study also concluded that 79% of supply chain leaders reported revenue growth that's significantly above the industry average. For the purposes of the study, supply chain leaders were defined by Deloitte as companies that had superior supply chain capabilities, and they calculated that and measured it based on inventory turnover, on-time delivery, and a few other factors. The supply chain leaders also had profit margins that were significantly above the industry average. So the conclusion is that companies that have very strong supply chains generate more revenue and higher profits. And how do these companies get their strong supply chains? According to Deloitte, it's because they're willing to invest in new supply chain technologies and be innovative, and business model kind of innovations like improving your supply chain network, your processes, your tools, your services. Those are hard for your competitors to imitate, so they tend to have a more lasting, sustainable impact on your results. The study also concluded that leadership, collaboration, and better managing your talent were also key competitive advantages for supply chain leaders. So with regards to investing to improve your supply chain technology tools, there's obviously a lot of different opportunities and choices. We're going to talk about one of them here on the next slide. An area that's been gaining in popularity, especially with mid-market companies, relates to improving supply chain collaboration with their suppliers. And a key reason for that is most companies are still handling much of their collaboration with manual processes, especially in the procure-to-pay kind of processes. And for those of you who may not be familiar with that term, procure-to-pay process, it's basically defined as the various activities that start when you communicate a purchase order out to your suppliers. They end when you pay that supplier's invoice, and that's typically after you've met, the supplier has met all your obligations. So various process steps in between include the purchase orders, purchase order acknowledgments, changes, shipping notices and visibility, goods receipt, invoicing, invoice matching, payment. All of those items kind of fall in that space. And in spite of available technology, most companies still execute these processes very manually. For example, a recent Chainlink research study showed that on average, companies only have 31% of their direct materials procurement spend automated. Larger companies do a little bit better than smaller companies. As you can see, companies over $1 billion in revenue have about 45% of their processes automated, but companies under $1 billion have only 25% automated. Pretty low number for both, but especially low for those smaller companies. And note that the level of automation is even worse with regards to the invoicing and payment portion of the process, with only around 28% automated. In our practice, we work with large, we work with small companies, and all in between. But it still surprises me how often we'll actually find multi-billion-dollar companies that take the output of their fancy million-dollar ERP system, and they'll still manually attach the PO to an email, even send a paper fax sometimes, and send it out to their suppliers. The suppliers don't always acknowledge the POs, but if they do, it's often more of a manual, email reply, sometimes the fax reply, or even a phone call. The buying company, looks at those acknowledgments. They might manually type the update into their ERP. Sometimes they even use spreadsheets to track the PO status. I won't keep going through the process, but these manual steps in tracking continue all the way through, tracking the shipments and handling paper invoices. So needless to say, there's a lot of opportunity for improvement for both large and small companies regarding the automation and collaboration with their suppliers. Regardless of the type of supply chain management improvement project that you're undertaking, proper planning and preparation are absolutely necessary to make sure you have a successful implementation and hopefully a quick ROI. So on the next few slides, I'm going to highlight 4 key areas that are critical for successful supply chain collaboration implementations. And in our experience, companies who neglect even one of these areas will run into challenges that they could have avoided with a little better pre-planning. The first area relates to your internal staff and change management. New initiatives, as you know, can start from the tops down, from the bottoms up, or anywhere in between. But regardless of where they start, it's important to get as many people as you can on board and supporting that initiative. When initiatives tend to start from the tops down, the supply chain executives, they likely understand, why a change is important, why it's being taken on. But convincing other departments or other teams can be a challenge. People, are naturally resistant to change. We're not very comfortable dealing with the unknown. People in organizations especially tend to be risk averse. You tend to worry about how a potential change is going to impact your job, maybe your organizational power. Maybe you're a subject matter expert in a current process, and if we change the process, hey, maybe I'm not the go-to person anymore for that process. There's a quote from Woodrow that I like, not because it's positive, but I like it. It says, if you want to make enemies, try to change something. Unfortunately, this can sometimes be true, especially in organizations. If you propose a change, you'll often hear that expression, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Or, usually broke is a relative term, kind of depends on your perspective. If you're the one doing the process, of course, you think it's running pretty smoothly. If you're looking from the outside in, you may think it's a little more broke. You'll also hear folks say, we've always done it this way. We've done it this way for years. Why do we need to change it now? That's where the concept of a supply chain evangelist comes into play. This is someone who can act more as a passionate champion for the cause, and they have a good understanding of your end-to-end supply chain. They can help you think through the impacts of new initiatives, which business units, functions, teams are likely to be impacted by the change. This can be a formal role or an informal role within your company, but either way, they're typically well respected in the organization. They've got the support of management, and that allows them to share the vision for the initiative across the company. It's more likely to be a formalized role if you've got a larger or a more complex organization. With new initiatives, it's critical that you communicate a clear and compelling vision for that project. If it's not clear, it's very difficult to get people excited about it and to get momentum and support for that change. You don't want to paint a vague picture. A good example of a clear vision was back in the 60s, 1961. President Kennedy shared his vision for the space program, and he said the U.S. is going to land a man on the moon and return him. Excuse me, losing my voice here. We're going to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade is over. That's pretty clear, pretty compelling, and as you know, people rallied around that and got it done. He didn't say the U.S. is going to be leaders in space exploration. That's a bunch of words, but it doesn't sound particularly clear or compelling. You've also got to support your clear vision by explaining why the change is important to the company. People need to understand, and they want to understand why they're being asked to change. What are the specific benefits that we're going to see? A good supply chain evangelist can help you see beyond just how much cost you might save in a specific silo and help connect the dots holistically across the supply chain so you can see how the proposed changes are going to create value for the company and help you be more competitive. The bottom line is the supply chain evangelist role, it's key in gaining that early momentum and support and communicating why a change is important for your company. Yeah, in order to get stakeholders to truly buy in and really be on board, you need to make that transition from why we're changing to who's going to be impacted, what exactly is going to change, how we're going to make it happen. And this can't be done in a vacuum, so you've got to involve a much broader audience in the communication and the pre-planning of the project. So each team needs to think about, what's that change going to make for our team, for me? What's it going to mean for our function? What are the specific process handoffs or interfaces between functions that we need to think about that could be impacted? It sounds pretty obvious, but it's critical to communicate particularly closely with teams and individuals that will be the most affected by the proposed changes, especially the frontline folks who are actually executing the process and doing the day-to-day work of the operations. These are the people who really know how processes are actually getting done because they're the ones doing it. Early consultation and inclusion are important for all the stakeholders, but it's especially important for those frontline doers because they're the ones who can typically find the holes in the proposed changes pretty quickly. It's better to involve the right folks early before you get too deep into your project planning so you can avoid those hard resets or the major kind of scope and design changes that happen later in the project, which are usually a lot more painful and expensive. If you've been around for a while, maybe you've worked in a larger company, you might have firsthand experience with the classic case of, hey, I'm from corporate, I'm here to help you out. This is where new initiatives get driven from the tops down, often by folks who don't really understand the details about how the existing process works. The idea looks pretty good on paper to them. They spend a lot of time, a lot of resources might get spent progressing the idea or the project. But finally, when the real subject matter experts or the doers get involved, they'll discover that critical flaw that could have been caught a lot sooner if you just involved the right people a bit earlier. And I know sometimes companies I've seen are reluctant to involve the frontline workers early because the project that they're taking on might actually eliminate their jobs. An example from a few years back, I was involved with a technology company that was implementing a freight payment automation project, and they had about 5 employees that were manually doing the freight payment related activities, and they delayed sharing the project information with those employees. They didn't actually actively involve them until right before the implementation, and the end result was that implementation took probably 50% longer than it should have. It involved way too much drama and bad feelings. So from a best practice perspective, the most successful companies that I've seen deal with this type of issue, they recognize that their employees are their most valuable asset, and they treat them that way. They involve those affected employees very early. They'll create a transition plan, spells out new job responsibilities, new training, and at the end of the day, the company is the one who benefits because they keep their loyal and very experienced workers happy throughout that implementation and also for the long term. So with regards to new initiatives, it's almost impossible to communicate too much or too early. When people get involved early, they provide feedback, they share ideas, and they tend to feel a lot more ownership for the success of that project. They've got a little more skin in the game, and they're likely to be supportive. Another area to highlight here is to make sure that your implementation is set up for success. And we're going to talk about 3 areas here that are important to get right. The first is functional scope. So it's important to spend time to think about and clearly document your desired business processes before you select a technology tool for your supplier collaboration project. This is especially true if you've got unique processes or complexity in your processes, because being able to execute on those processes might be a key differentiator or a competitive advantage for your company or business, Companies that select a technology tool, or maybe you're forced to select a particular tool by your IT department before you've really got a clear understanding of your desired business processes, are often disappointed. You find yourselves constrained by the capabilities of that tool. So it's good to really focus on business processes first. It's also important to prioritize your desired functionality as what's required and what's nice to have. It's rare that you're going to find a technology solution that satisfies 100% of your desired functionality right out of the box. So although you might try to find a solution that covers as much as you have on your list, you may need to be flexible on what's nice to have and just focus on the higher priority items. Basic project management involves, managing the three key things: scope, schedule, resources. Looking at just one of them in isolation is not too helpful because all three are very interrelated. But in my experience, one of the most common reasons for project problems is setting an unrealistic schedule. Management sometimes is a little too short-term focused, and they'll push to get too much scope implemented a little too fast to justify a faster ROI for the project. And this creates an excessive amount of business risk for the company, meaning more of a risk of disrupting your operations. And the end result is usually that the project is not set up for success, and the ROI actually takes a lot longer to achieve than you expected. So a fast implementation is great, but you need to balance that speed with some thoughtful risk mitigation. Implementing in phases is a good way to mitigate your risk, and it allows the project team to really focus on important tasks and do quality work without feeling the time pressure to cut corners. This builds really positive momentum for the project. It stays on schedule, hits milestones, produces results, and ROI step by step. In the past, I've seen projects where the management will purposely set an unrealistic schedule, and they fully expect various milestones are going to slip. And this approach typically causes the project team, a lot of stress, obviously, but they tend to do rushed or sloppy work, and they'll cut corners, and they lose morale and momentum for the project. Clear metrics is the third item here that's real important to set yourself up for success. Obviously, it's important to have clear metrics to measure your operating performance in your supply chain, but it's especially important to have clear metrics for a new solution implementation. If you don't have clear metrics, how are you going to tell if you're actually successful or not in your implementation? The key point is that you define what success means for your project, and that you've got metrics that are key indicators of that success. And you need to make sure that the project team, sponsors, stakeholders, everyone needs to buy in and agree on those metrics, and you should start measuring at least some of the metrics before the implementation. So you've got an accurate baseline that you can measure against as you start rolling with the project. There's different categories of supply chain metrics, obviously, such as cost, service level, inventory, quality, on-time delivery, typical supply chain categories. But the key is use metrics that are meaningful to your business and your project. As an example, if you're implementing a supplier collaboration solution, maybe it's focused on the procure-to-pay automation. Some common metrics are things like the procurement operational cost, labor productivity, supplier performance, like on-time delivery and accuracy. Did you get the right item and the right quantity on the promised date? Straight-through processing rates. This is more the percent of documents that are processed all the way through the process without any errors and are untouched by people, like purchase order documents, invoice documents that are flowing through your process. Also, supplier adoption rates. What percent of suppliers were we able to get on board in a certain time? How many suppliers did we get on board? Those kind of things. So if you get these three areas on the slide right, you've gone a long way in setting up your implementation for success. On this slide, we're going to talk about some key system choices, especially if you're looking at implementing a supplier collaboration solution. The first consideration is to decide if it makes sense to invest further in your existing systems. Usually that's your ERP system, or if you'd be better served using a third-party system. Some ERPs, they do offer their own supplier integration portals, especially the mainstream ERPs, like SAP, Oracle, and some of the others. So before making a decision that you're going to use a third-party solution, you should spend an appropriate amount of time researching first if your existing ERP offers a collaboration solution, and if it does, what are the advantages and the disadvantages, both in terms of functionality and cost. The typical pro of going with an existing ERP system is that most of these have internal integration work already done if you go with their collab solution. You still have to do some external integration, but most of that internal integration work is already done. The con of going with your existing ERP and their collab solution is often that it may be less flexible with regards to configuring those ERP systems to meet your unique business needs, and they're often a bit more expensive to implement. Some companies use multiple ERPs, often due to mergers or just globalization or the evolution of your business and your business units. If you have multiple ERPs, including homegrown systems as well as mainstream systems, it's usually best to use a third-party solution that can handle the integration across multiple ERPs. When customers get their multiple systems into a single automated collab console, the typical benefits they see include significant improvements in their visibility, the end-to-end visibility and inbound visibility of their materials, improvements in labor productivity, and the ability, now that they've got things in one system, to actually capture and report supplier performance data. Another consideration is, do you prefer to implement a SaaS solution, SaaS meaning subscription as a service or cloud solution, or an on-premise solution? And that usually depends on two things. The first is the ROI considerations. The second is IT resources and support. If a quick ROI is important for your company, then SaaS is by far the preferred solution. SaaS or cloud implementations, they typically require a much smaller upfront investment, less cash outflow since you're just starting a subscription versus purchasing the software license outright. The cloud implementations can typically be done a bit faster because you don't have to buy and set up your own hardware and your servers on premise. The analogy is sort of like if you're deciding to buy or lease a car. If you buy a car, it costs you a lot more money up front, but it's cheaper if you're going to drive that car for a long time. When you lease a car, you've got to trade it in every couple of years and upgrade, and that costs you over time. So you've got to look at the model, understand where your business is, and it really depends on your own desired business model which you'll choose. Regarding IT resources and support, on-premise can make a lot of sense if you've got a strong and deep IT team, or if you want to keep that skill set to maintain the solution inside your business more as a core competency. On-premise requires your IT team to be involved for the duration of the implementation and throughout the life of the solution as well, whereas SaaS typically only requires your IT team's help to set up and maintain the required connectivity between your ERP and the third-party solution. Integration is a key consideration if you're choosing a third-party collaboration solution. So it's important that you really understand the available protocols, the formats that your current system already has in place. You want to look for third-party solutions that are very flexible, and they can integrate with a variety of different protocols and formats. More options typically means that it's easier for that solution to fit in with what you've already got available in your organization. And also that flexibility is going to make it easier in the future to integrate with additional systems as your needs evolve. If your current systems do not already have the capability built out to send and receive and integrate files, then you need to consider the availability and the expertise of your internal IT resources for building out those required data feeds for a third-party system. And if you choose a third-party solution that's not very flexible, this can be a pretty time-consuming activity. The bottom line is it's important to make very good systems choices and think through all three of these areas if you're considering implementing a supplier collaboration solution. Moving on to supplier participation. Supplier participation and acceptance is absolutely critical for a collaboration project. If you're going to invest in this space, you obviously need your suppliers to participate in order to achieve your goals and your ROI. The success of your system is directly tied to your suppliers' willingness to use the system. If you're a big fish in a small pond, your suppliers are typically a lot more willing to participate and use your collaboration system. So larger companies do tend to have an advantage. They can often do more dictating regarding which systems their suppliers are going to use. Small and mid-market companies don't have that advantage, so they need to be a little bit more creative, maybe use a little more finesse. And for them, it's key to ensure that the system is easy to use and it's appealing to the suppliers. So regardless if you're small, medium, or large, for long-term success, there needs to be benefits to both sides. So as an example, if you're a large retailer, you could lean on your major suppliers to implement your new RFID system, and that new system might help you be more efficient in your downstream distribution centers, your retail stores. It really helps you out. But if you keep all of those benefits to yourself, your major suppliers are going to have costs to implement and maintain the new RFID process, but they're not going to see any benefits. So ultimately, they're going to raise their price to you in some fashion to recover the cost. On the other hand, if you share some of that improved RFID-enabled data with them, and if it's able to improve their demand and production planning efficiency, save them some money in some way, they're likely not going to raise the prices to you, and you both have net positive benefits. Another example could be, it's a collaboration web portal. You're implementing e-invoicing. You'll get the benefits of better visibility, less manual processes, more labor, more productive labor. And if your suppliers can actually get their invoices paid faster and get better cash flow, that's a win for them, and they'll be a lot more excited about it. So it needs to be a win-win for long-term success. And if you ask your suppliers to change something in their processes, just like we talked about earlier with people's resistance to change, it's natural you're going to meet with some resistance or uncertainty. In our experience, besides just making it a win-win, there's some relatively simple steps you can take to make the supplier onboarding process easier and more pain-free. Again, the more suppliers that participate in your collaboration initiative, the more successful you're going to be. So on this slide, we're going to cover 7 key steps to supplier onboarding that will make the process easier and more effective for both you and your suppliers. The first is proactive and preemptive communication. Don't wait for your suppliers to push back. Be proactive and make the case for those benefits that the new initiative is going to bring to both sides, especially to the supplier, right? So focus on things like faster payments, better visibility to demand, shorter cycle times, reduced manual labor, reduced errors in the process on their side. You want to make the process as seamless as possible from the beginning so your suppliers can't find a reason to push back. Also, communicating the plan early with them will help gain some trust. Prioritize the suppliers that you're going to onboard first, right? The 80-20 rule typically applies, where 20% of your suppliers make up 80% of your total spend. There's 2 different approaches that our customers typically consider. The first is start with your higher volume or your more strategic suppliers first and onboard a few of them to get more spend into the new process or the new tool faster. This approach has a little more business risk because if you run into issues, you're dealing with higher volume items or more strategic items, but it also can create faster ROI and benefits because you're getting that volume online faster, so it's more of a risk-reward. Also, some of those suppliers, if they're strategic or high volume, they may be more willing to work with you for a new idea, new concept, because they've got a better long-term relationship with you. The second alternative is the opposite. You start with the lower volume, lower risk suppliers first, and after you prove and stabilize the process, you can move on to additional suppliers or higher volume and more strategic suppliers later. This approach has a lot less business risk, but you do tend to get slower ROI and benefits because it takes a while to ramp up the volume. You can do in between as well, a hybrid process, but the key is create a plan that you're comfortable with and it works well for your business. Number 3 here is plan how your suppliers are going to connect. Your suppliers can primarily be divided between B2B suppliers who might connect via EDI or XML. These are more the high volume, large suppliers, and online suppliers who would likely use a web portal as a user interface. If they're B2B suppliers, find out what EDI format that they're already using or they prefer. They're going to buy in a lot more easily to a new system if you can offer to connect with them in their existing or their preferred format and method. If you're doing online suppliers, the connectivity is usually a non-issue as long as the collaboration portal supports the browser that the supplier is already using. So it's best to analyze the browser versions that are used by suppliers and prioritize the onboarding process based on suppliers that are using the supported browser and supported versions. Easy or automatic registration. So this relates to getting supplier users set up with access to the web portal. And the best collaboration portals allow your admins to efficiently send out email invitations to your suppliers. And they'll typically contain a link to the portal, a temp ID, and a temp password. The suppliers with this kind of a process can typically get online and registered within minutes. And in any automated process, there's always going to be some users that run into issues. So you want to make sure you have some kind of a support team or support person standing by and ready to quickly resolve supplier issues as they're getting set up in the portal. Some of the other best practices include things like allowing the supplier admins to submit required certificates or documents online so they can be easily tracked. Allow them to manage their portal space by adding and managing their own users and setting up roles for them. Allow them to define preferences like default views or dashboards for their own users. Those kind of things are quite helpful. You also want to plan for future growth. Your solution should be flexible and have the ability to integrate in a variety of protocols and formats. We talked a bit about that earlier. That flexibility is going to make it easier to integrate with other systems and partners in the future as your needs evolve. Again, mergers and acquisitions, other kinds of business events, they can create that need where you need to scale very quickly, and it's best to be ready and have some flexibility in your solution ready for that growth. You also want to prioritize the processes to implement. For example, if the majority of you and your suppliers' headaches or time are spent dealing with invoicing issues, start by focusing on an AP automation process. If the majority of your headaches are spent on purchase order changes or acknowledgments, start with a purchase order collaboration process. If the suppliers are feeling pain in a particular area, they're going to be a lot more willing to give the new solution a try. And then after you've successfully improved that first process and kind of eliminated some pain there, you can then roll out additional processes later. So you want to look for solutions that allow this kind of modular implementation so you've got flexibility to phase and grow over time. Training, obviously, it's very critical. You need to provide excellent training to your suppliers. The training experience typically forms the very first user perception of the platform, and you want it to be positive. If your team doesn't have the bandwidth or maybe the skill set to develop and run the training plan, then you want to work with your solution provider or other outside training vendor to provide that service for you. If it's a live training, plan it at least a few weeks in advance. You want to make sure you give the suppliers plenty of time to arrange their schedules to attend. It's also a best practice if you create recorded training sessions to provide flexibility so new employees or others can watch that training on demand. It's also important to plan how you're going to continue to train and support your suppliers after the go-live. Most smaller companies don't have an internal staff available to do this. It's not their full-time job once they get things up and running with the project. So it's good to find a solution provider who can handle this for you with minimal overhead. So by following these 7 steps, you can make the onboarding process a lot easier, more effective for both you and your suppliers. And what you're trying to show your suppliers that the investment on their part is pretty minimal, but the benefits to both the suppliers and your company are undeniable. Let's do a quick recap of some of the key points we talked about. Mid-market companies, they're looking at upgrading or implementing their tools. Research supports, that's a smart move. There's also a lack of automation throughout the procure-to-pay process, especially with mid-market companies, so supplier collaboration projects are gaining in popularity. Proper planning and preparation, they're necessary to ensure you have a successful implementation, a quick ROI. Part of that planning and preparation is to make sure that you've got support throughout the company, tops down through bottoms up, and especially individuals in all of the affected functions. Everyone inside your business, they need to understand how the project is going to benefit them and the entire company and be ready to do their part. Also, your supplier partners need to see the benefits, be ready, and be willing to participate. Win-win is key. The benefits can't just be one-sided. We spent a lot of time going through the details within these 4 key areas here at the bottom of the slide, so I won't add too much now. The key point is that companies who neglect even one of these areas, you will likely run into implementation or supplier adoption challenges that could have been avoided with a little better pre-planning and preparation. If your company is considering implementing a new supplier collaboration solution, maybe we can help you out. I work for Take Supply Chain, and as you know, we're the sponsor of this webinar, and we do specialize in this space. We work with our customers to improve both their global trading partner collaboration and also their overall process efficiency. We've been doing this for a pretty long time, about 2 decades, 20 years. We're located here in Austin, Texas, and we specialize in working with mid-market manufacturers and distributors. And we have a long track record of really focusing on our customers, making sure they're successful from the implementation all the way through ongoing support. OneSCM is the name of the supply chain collaboration and management solution that we have. It's a solution as a service. It's built specifically for the needs of mid-market supply chains. It has 3 primary modules, and they tend to focus on the very common areas of inefficiency in the procure-to-pay process: procurement collaboration, inbound materials, AP automation. OneSCM is a SaaS-based system. It's easily configurable and allows you to use your desired business processes. It's also modular, so it can easily scale and grow with your business. We have a program that we call Take Forward, and that program provides all that you need for a smooth implementation and a successful ongoing program. It includes managed services, onboarding, and support for your team, but also for your suppliers. OneSCM provides real-time visibility, the ability for both you and your suppliers to quickly execute transactions via web portal, as well as just the visibility. OneSCM can be implemented fast. It has reasonable subscription rates, and it allows for a very low total cost of ownership. So we would love to have a conversation with you about how we can help you improve your supply chain. The next slide contains some contact information for us, so feel free to reach out. That's the end of the slide portion of the webinar.